Hello and welcome to the Paper Prototypes podcast. I'm Rex and I'm here with...
Dene Carter.
And Dean, I'm here to interview you about your game Moonring. So why don't you tell me about a little bit about your self and then we can talk about the game.
Yeah, so I'm pretty much the solo dev on Moonring, which is a peculiar homage to the old Ultima games, with modern design principles because nobody has the time for that shit, as somebody once put it. And I'm really old, so I have been making games since 1985. Apparently, I'm not going to stop. They remain profitable.
I did see in your background, so apparently when you first started working on games, you worked on the ZX Spectrum?
Yes, otherwise known as the best machine ever made. It was lovely.
What's it like working on that compared to modern development?
So the fascinating thing for me is going back occasionally and realizing how primitive the design setup was, what the development setup was. So you had a cassette deck to record your games on, and as everybody knows, if you want to retain information forever, a cheap Tandy cassette deck that you bought for $5 is definitely the way to keep those records. So I would say if I had to describe the entire experience of developing for 8-bit machines at the time, I'd say fraught.
And you've also had, well, really, a long-lived career. You were a founder and creative director at Blue Box Studios. Then you went on to be a founder and creative director at Lionhead Studios before founding Fluttermind.
Yeah, that's right. So Big Blue Box was a satellite company of Lionhead. Basically, I was working there with my brother. Sorry, I was working at EA with my brother at the time. We just finished working on Dungeon Keeper and realized we didn't really want to be at EA anymore because there was something soul-crushingly depressing about it at the time. We were just happy. So Lionhead was offering sort of satellite studio positions. They would provide us with all of the sort of legal and testing capability we would need, along with the amazing Russell Shaw, their musician, in order for us to make whatever games we wanted. And that seemed like too good an offer to turn down. And from there, yeah, so we then eventually got bought up by Lionhead. And then Lionhead sold to Microsoft, so technically I was a Microsoft employee for a while. Sure, they didn't really envisage the sorts of people who worked at Lionhead being official Microsoft employees at the time. That must have been a really weird awakening for them. And then I went indie after was sort of halfway through Fable 3, I think, just because I kind of had enough and wasn't getting to do enough actual hands-on stuff myself. I was spending all of my days telling people to do things, and then when my wife would ask, "What do you do today?" at the end of the day, I'd go, "I have no idea." And I found that horribly unsatisfying. This can't remain. I have to do something.
So you reached the top of your career where you didn't have to work anymore, which is like people's dreams, and you went, fuck it, I'm going back to square one, I'm going indie.
Absolutely. For me, there's something literally magical about starting off with nothing and then having things running around in the world that you have created the physics for. You've decided the night and day cycles. I mean, it's the closest I can think of to being sort of the Sorcerer's Apprentice, and genuinely creating sort of stuff from nothing, from light, and having it dance around on the screen in front of you. That's a wonderful thing. And that's what made me fall in love with video games to start with. Like, the first time I saw Defender in an arcade, I was just looking at this black screen with all these bright, pixelated explosions and seemingly intelligent, sort of bejeweled beetle carapaces running around or floating around and shooting, and there was just something like, this has come from nothing. Like, when I turn this machine off, there will be nothing there, and then when I boot it back up again, it will res into life, and that just entranced me. Well, yeah, I have never stopped being amazed and enchanted by that.
So you've been doing Fluttermind for, it looks like it's been a combined 14 years?
Oh God, don't say that.
Sorry.
It is unfortunately correct, yes. Yeah, so I started off in 2009, and it was glorious. I thoroughly enjoyed getting back into coding, semi ineptly. I enjoyed throwing myself at relearning art, etc., because I'd not really done any drawing or painting for years. I enjoyed getting into writing music because I mean, for me, that's what the old school dev thing was about. You were by necessity a Renaissance man. You would learn how to write music. You would learn how to make your own art. You would learn to code and all the rest of it. So for me, I got back into doing that, and that was wonderful. So that I made a game called Flaboo in about 9 months while I was learning how to use OpenGL, and then I did a game called Inkaboto, which did pretty well actually, and was like my first ever puzzle game because I'd not written a puzzle game before, so I had to learn how to think in the way that you need to think to make puzzle games. And then I realized pretty swiftly the bottom was falling out of the iOS market with free to play. And I did not want any part of free to play. That wasn't why I was there. I was there to make cool games. And then free to play came along and kind of nuked that. So I tried making a game called Bemuse for a while, which was product of literal madness, I would say, while I was learning to make 3D models from scratch. And then took a break from that to do a game called Spellraiser, which was my first dip into sort of super 80s nostalgia stuff, and I would say is sort of the founding of the look of Moonring to some degree. And then various other little obscure projects until, we come to today, really.
And what made you want to pursue Moonring specifically? Because an Ultima throwback sounds like an interesting choice to have worked on.
Yeah, so initially I was just thinking about how cool the Ultima games were, and I think I idly mentioned on Twitter, when it was Twitter rather than Shitter, that it would be fun to try to make something like that, but use all of the modern principles and all the cool things and all the procedural generation stuff you could use these days to make something absolutely vast with, sea erosion of coastlines and regenerating villages and towns and whole civilizations rising and falling over time, blah, 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 blah. And I had a couple of people, like maybe 5 or 6, which was quite a lot for me, say, that's a great idea. I thought, yes, definitely a great idea. That's how you design games. You get 5 or 6 people to say, please engage with this, you mad fool, and then you go and do it. And then, of course, while you're developing things, you start to realize that a lot of the boasts and the initial ideas that seem super cool are actually completely pointless and add in no way to the pleasure of playing the damn thing. So away went all of the sea erosion and a lot of the proc gen stuff for towns and villages. And I eventually boiled it down to what was actually going to be fun, which was a fixed overworld with randomly generated dungeons beneath. And that's where we are today.
Yeah, I was going to say, the game I fell in love with does not sound like the initial game you were designing.
No, that's because I, in my head, just like mentally boasted what it was going to turn into and thought, I could do all those things we were going to do with Fable. And then I realized like halfway through again why we cut all those things from Fable, because they were crap. So yeah.
Do you ever think you're going to try to explore those ideas, or are you just kind of like done with some of them permanently?
I honestly think they're the sorts of things that sound really cool on paper, but then when you come down to games, they're all about how do I manipulate the player's psychology. That is what a game is. It's a psychology manipulation machine. Whether you want it to be or not, you're either trying to make somebody feel cool, or you're trying to make them feel calm, or you're trying to make them feel scared, or empowered, or frankly, just a sense of wonder, which is what I wanted from Moonring. I wanted players to go out and go, wow, I have no idea what's out there, and everything looks so weird and interesting, and I wonder what's just over the horizon, edge of the screen. So I mean that's what it is for me, and so if an idea doesn't add to that, then it's frankly a complete waste of everybody's time, including the developers.
And so, how did you end up? Is that how you ended up with some of the bizarrish color palettes you have in Moonring? Because that was like the first thing that drew me to the game.
Oh, cool! I'm glad. I've heard from some people it's the first thing that turned them off from the game.
Oh,
Um,
really?
yeah. So no. So the palette thing was I knew I wanted to go with a reduced palette. My art is not great, um, but the thing I'm really good at is figuring out frameworks and rule sets to develop a style really quickly that allows me to create stuff without messing it up. And so I knew I wanted, at the time, I think it was 3 colors. And one of my friends said, I can do some art for you, but I'm going to insist that you have 4 colors. I went, oh, fine, whatever. Can one of them be a shade of the other one? And so that's kind of how we ended up with the color palette we had. But then I knew I wanted to do the kind of thing I've seen on a lot of retro games that are set to the Game Boy palette, where they add optional other palettes while you're playing. I thought, but I don't want to do that. I don't want to just have palette swaps between places. And then I thought, okay, so what would cause the colors to change? And that's kind of how the moon idea came around. It's like, well, okay, what if the lighting here was set by something other than a fixed, simple sun? And so it's like, okay, well, what if each moon has its own palette? Or why would it have its own palette? What would the palette represent? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's honestly how I develop most of my lore. I will have a hole somewhere, or something that kind of begs for an answer, and then I will make up shit to fill that space. And if most creatives are honest, I think they will find they probably do something similar. I never trust anybody who claims they come out with an idea sort of whole cloth. Oh yes, this idea has been in my head for 10 solid years, and oh yes, nothing's ever changed. Really, sir, really, you may be the first.
Oh, what's the expression? Kill your darlings, like when you're working on stuff.
Well, I mean that always comes in anyway. But I don't. My view is never have any darlings to start with. Keep them at arm's length. Keep them as kind of associates perhaps, but not darlings. And that way you never have to kill anything that's too precious to you. But I mean the problem is as a coder, of course, that when you've actually made something and it's working, and then you just realize it's not fulfilling that psychological thing I was talking about earlier, it's not providing the fear, or it's not providing the wonder, then you start looking at it askance. You start going, and I'm sure if it can think, it's going to go, oh God, my days are numbered, aren't they? It's like, yeah, sorry, real-time shield system, you don't really fit the rest of the game. It's like, yeah, you realize you spent 30 hours on me, right? Yeah, I know, I spent 30 hours on you. It was a waste of time. Sorry, you're dead. And then you kill it. And that's the way it works. It's cruel, but
I just think it's interesting that you develop I guess, the gaps first, and then you develop the lore, because it's quite the opposite of how a lot of devs I've talked to, as well as my personal way I make things, is I usually have the lore first, and then start working with explanations and trying to warp things in.
So my view is that I prefer a live mystery to a dead fact. And I think that audiences are the same in that regard. I think they like to have holes. As long as there's enough kind of foundation and pillars around for them to string ideas between to fill in those gaps, then I think you've done a reasonable job. But I think answering everything in a concrete way is the dullest thing you can possibly present to a reader or a film goer or a gamer. It's terrible. It leaves no room at all for self-expression or the wonder, like not knowing why something is in the game, but still kind of recognizing its flavor and its mood fits the rest of it is lovely. It gives you an opportunity to opine and talk about it with your friends. But if there's a 24 page, what am I talking about? 240-page manual,
Jesus.
filling all of the details of where everything comes from. Like, well, you read it and you go, oh, that's cool. My engagement is over. And so that's the way I feel about it. I would much rather have a whole somebody can talk about than something concrete people can kind of go, don't like that, or do you like that? And that's like the level of their engagement.
There were moments where, like, you have bookcases everywhere, and they'll just be like, here's a random translation, but there was one book that was like, yeah, in the past, people birthed children, now they just kind of emerge. And I was like, what the fuck does this mean? And just that book has been in my head. I have no idea what you meant by that. Where do they emerge from?
They emerge from the muck, the mire, and the grime of the world and crawl their way out, knowing only where they should go and not really anything else. But as they crawl, they slowly grow memories and thoughts and a personality. And when they finally arrive at their destination, they are formed enough to be clothed and given a role in that society.
That is horrific in
Good.
definition.
Good. That is the general idea. It is frankly a horror game, but clothed in kind of a slightly cutesy retro aesthetic. Everything's horror.
Hmm?
I was gonna say everything's horror if you look too deeply at it.
Because the very first playthrough I did was I immediately left town, died, and went, this isn't for me. Then tried again, and actually started engaging and trying to dig around through everything. And the more and more I went through Moonring, the more and more unnerved I was. That's part of the reason I really like the color palette, is because it makes the whole world feel alien, even though it's supposed to be the world I supposedly grew up in. But because I'm dreamless, I also don't belong.
Correct. Absolutely correct. Thank you for saying that. I love it when people get it. It is fundamentally an alien and unpleasant universe and has been made so by the forces outside it. And in fact, the more you learn about the ancient civilization and the more you hear about its cruelty and its inequality, the more you should recognize that it's very much like our world.
That's why I will buy when you sell the map, because I'm really big into maps, and I will not
Me
look at
too.
it or hang it until after I beat the game, because I want to have that map I want to actually explore every single tile. That's what I've been doing so far.
Well, the nice thing is like my plan for the future is, let me rewind a bit. So every single tile of that world can be filled with a full location. At the moment, sort of 99% of those tiles, because it's a fairly large world, are filled with randomized locations. But every so often, I will get an idea for something. I'll go, oh no, this deserves its own place. I could do that with every single tile of the 512 by 512 map. And so for me, there's so much sort of opportunity to just fill it and make it a super dense world that you could, travel around and find mysteries in for days, hell, years.
Part of that mystery, though, with Moonring is definitely just the fact that the game doesn't. It doesn't tell you shit. Are you worried that players will pop off when that happens?
No. And this is where I say some really arseholey things. So I was engaged for many years in trying to bring in audiences for games that don't exist. Like, I love Fable, I love Albion, but I will also say that there was this constant drive within the studio to try and reach out to people who, apparently had a console but weren't really into games. And I just thought that was ludicrous at the time, but that's the mission we set ourselves into.
I have met those people. They buy the console, they buy like Call of Duty or a sports game, and that's it. That's all they need. That's
Well, the idea was that we were somehow going to entrance those people and say, haha, you can also play other games as well. But the truth is, those people really aren't into it. And so when I started out with Fluttermind, thinking, well, no, I'll do the same thing. Games for everybody. But nowadays, older and more cynical, my view is, look, if I were an author, I wouldn't write games for those who are illiterate. So I wouldn't write novels for the illiterate. And so for me now, I'm not going to write games for people who don't like games anymore. There is no point. And I think that if nothing else, From Software's success, which is a really peculiarly enviable success. Like, it's interesting to me that so many people in the AAA industry look at From Software as a massive success, considering the relatively small number of units they sell. I go, wow, it would be great to be like them. It's like, well, you're sitting on the God of War franchise, or you're sitting on Call of Duty, right? And yet you're looking longingly at From Software. That says something about the sorts of games you wish you were making. And so for me, I wanted to make a game that was as opaque as a From Software game that kind of left a lot of things to you, taught you the things that were perhaps a little unusual, but then said, go for it, see what you can do here, and give you that sense of wonder. Because I think if you explain why everything is there, then you kind of chip away at the wonder until all you're left with is just, again, dead facts rather than questions.
But are you at all worried that people who would normally engage with this type of game might miss the mark? Because like when I first booted up your game, I just immediately left the starting town, which means I never would have found the Serpent's Eye or anything like that, which means I just would have been lost, potentially? Is there any way that you capture players who do that, or are you just kind of like good luck?
I'm kind of good luck for a number of reasons. I mean, first of all, this game was always meant to be free. There was at no point in time, like right from the beginning, there was no point in time when I attached a price tag to it. My goal was to make it as ubiquitous as I possibly could. That does not mean the same thing as I want everybody to finish it. I wanted everybody to at least give it a chance. And so I was relatively confident that even without any hand-holding, and I don't mean that in a sort of pejorative sense, I mean that in a purely, I will lead the way for you. Even without that, people would probably bounce off, but then if the game did enough numbers as a free game, be pulled in when they had people say, no, trust me, it's really good. And for me, that's much, much better than my game insisting to the player that it's really good. It seems almost needy doing that. No, please stick around. Please play with me. I would much rather somebody else they knew and trusted, whether it's somebody online or in their lives, said, no. Honestly, it's not as harsh and punishing as all that, really. It's, give it a moment. I think I would rather have that kind of engagement. And so far, that's worked out for me as well. The people who have kind of come back and talked to me about the game and what they enjoyed, whatever else, have all understood that and actually appreciated the fact that the world felt a little punishing.
Well, I was going to agree with that statement because, like, if the world holds your hand, or I guess the game holds your hand and points into the directions to go, it doesn't feel alien. Like the reason, like one of the things I liked about Moonring is I'm playing a world that doesn't feel like it was built for me, and I have to fight the world to figure out what I'm supposed to do. And if you held my hand the whole time, I wouldn't have that feeling would not have been evoked.
No, indeed. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. But again, sort of games are all about understanding the psychology you want to provoke or evoke in your players and doing everything you can to make sure you honor that at all times. And for me, I wanted a sense of sort of alien wonder and exploration. And when I say exploration, I mean beyond just maps. I mean, exploring systems. So I explain the systems you need to understand to survive, but there are plenty of others that are there that are pretty evident if you're playing with attention. And I don't mean that they'll be patronizing again, but this is not a game where you headbutt your way to victory. Having come from iOS and having seen games sort of devolve to that level, well done, you tapped a button once. Woohoo! Have a prize, have a dopamine hit. I absolutely despise that level of derision for your audience. Like, people are smart. People create beautiful, wonderful things. People think deeply about things. Even if your hobby is following football teams, there's a lot of stuff that goes into your head when you're thinking about your football teams. There's a lot of engagement there. And if your hobby happens to be games, then I'm going to trust that you're engaged with this hobby sufficiently to do a little bit of mental work and enjoy it more because of that.
So I'm guessing not only you feel that the modern gaming landscape could learn a thing or two from not explaining everything, but also, do you think the AAA gaming space is capable of doing so?
I think that the developers in AAA space are capable of doing wondrous things. I think that the people who hold the purse strings are not. And in some ways, I can't blame them. I think it's very easy as an indie developer with a very small budget to say, well, I'm going to be brave. I'm going to do all these brave and ridiculous things. And, if there's an audience, that's great. And if there isn't, then I guess I'm going back to my job at the insurance firm, etc. But when you're sitting there and your budget is as many millions as it is, just for marketing alone, you absolutely need that to be a game people buy, don't return, and then talk about having finished at some point. Like that is your real goal. You're trying to make sure that people say, yes, I got $60 worth or $70 worth of goodness from this game. And that is your entire goal. You just want a largish number of people to not feel that they paid for something they didn't get all of their money's worth out of. And you don't do that if you are making a game that's a little off-putting, if it's a little bit alien, if it's a little strange, if it says, you know what, this may not be for you. That is not how you make a huge amount of money from a populist audience. So I don't think they're capable of it, not because of a lack of talent, but because of a lack of will. I do not see any financial situation emerging where that level of experimentation will occur. And I've even seen quotes this week from I can't remember which industry figureheads it was, but they were saying, you know, oh no, it was actually the movie. It was the movie industry. The movie industry has been completely shocked by the success of Oppenheimer and Barbie, and are saying, "Phew, wow, didn't expect this level of success." And yeah, our Marvel movies really aren't doing very well right now. We're going to have to learn how to do some new and interesting things. When what they really mean is we're going to wait until somebody who is a little less risk averse does something interesting, and then a little more interesting, and then rip them off. So that is what I actually think will happen. I think that AAA will buy up the next hot, expandable indie darling, and then try and make it into, you know, their new Minecraft or whatever.
Well, Embracer Group was trying, and that didn't work out very well.
Yeah.
So, putting that aside, something you brought up earlier was that you wanted to go back to Ultima because there is something to this idea of not explaining everything to the player that's really important, but you wanted to shave away some of those rougher edges for more modern sensibilities. What are those modern sensibilities?
I think the modern sensibilities are really easy to define. They were basically any time I came to an interface or a level of opacity, and my brain went, "Oh, I don't have time for this shit." It's like, "Oh, okay, yeah. Let me write down a little note there." That is not something I'm willing to do when I'm lacking hours. And I mean, that's really this is really interesting to talk about now because I've just realized what it is I use as kind of a measuring stick. If I felt that the thing was a waste of my time, I wanted to remove it. If I felt like it was something that required a little bit more mental investment, I'd keep it. And so a lot of the interface issues on those early games, you know, were very much a product of the relatively low level of technology and the youth of the industry. And nowadays, I just don't think people have time to learn, you know, 200 keys that are not on screen that require a separate card or a keyboard overlay. I mean, I don't have the money for a keyboard overlay, and I'm not sure they'd fit on all the massive varieties of machines there are all over the world now. But so, you know, let's put the letters on the keys you have to use. It's really not very complicated. And when it comes to trying to remember what something is in the game, generally I will have explained it somewhere. When I am trying to use something from my inventory, I'm not going to insist you remember a number or a letter that you have just seen to tell me which item it is you're trying to interact with. So it's basically all those things where I feel there's like an extra leap necessary to engage with the thing you're trying to do to start with. The ultimate one in Moonring is probably the note taking, because
God bless the note system.
I mean, it could be better. It could be better. There could be more ways to organize it and ways to tag the things you've read and all those sorts of things, and those will be coming. But for me, it was like, well, I used to literally have tons of notebooks lying around, and that's cute and all. But if you're, you know, a father of two who's sneaking in an hour of Moonring just after his children have gone to bed, then you probably don't want to be searching around for your notepad where you left those obscure notes about what I wrote on some walls. So that was my goal again, like just to try and make sure it was streamlined, but not brain dead.
Are you worried that some people are going to see some of these old school systems and still think that some of that friction is there? Because when I first talked to a player and I saw that I have to type in words, my brain instantly thought back to like the old school, like you have to type everything in, and I was like, oh no, how the hell am I going to do that? And then it's actually quite easy. You don't tell players this, but when keywords appear, not only are they highlighted, but they'll flash above the player's head, letting you know, hey, here's a conversation that you can continue, that your character would naturally be curious about, that you can continue the dialogue with. Or you could use your notes and find something that hasn't been said that you would need to say.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. So the dialogue system for me was all about feeling like you were actually talking to people rather than choosing from some options, and making you feel like you are actually there. I'm trying to think of a way to describe this. For me, there's always a massive disconnect between most protagonists in games and me as a player. And as soon as I'm picking options from a set of responses, I kind of feel like I'm no longer that player. Like it moves me away. I'm suddenly very aware I'm playing a game. By getting you to type out at least a little bit of something with intent, for me that's gives you the illusion, although briefly, of that, well, no, I'm actually having to say these things. And I try to make it as easy as possible. So there are like little hints all over the place about the fact you can press tab or just press return as soon as a word appears. And those little words that appear above your character, telling you what you're thinking about at the moment. Those are all there to try and reduce the friction. And if anybody has any suggestions for how I can reduce the friction there further, then I'm all ears. The one problem I will say is that because I'm slightly inept, the game runs at two slightly different speeds based on the machine you are using. And those little speech things above your head disappear really quickly if you have a relatively powerful machine, which is not what was intended. And I only discovered watching other people play on YouTube. I went, what the hell? But no, that's not right. So hopefully they've been fixed in the most recent experimental builds. But yeah, it's not meant to be quite as bizarre as it is.
With how big the game is, and it's how many hours would you say it takes to beat Moonring?
I would say it depends. I've seen some people speed run it in about 26, and most people seem to be taking around 40-ish.
So 40 hours of content. That's hard to like test through, and I know every single game dev's like you got to test through your game. So how do you manage that? How do you like I don't know how like how do you
God.
figure out the pacing between hour 35 versus the pacing of hour 26?
Well, that's different. There's two sides to this. I mean, first of all, it's a huge game, and just in terms of the number of systems there are in it. And I've tried to make sure that most of those systems interact as well, which is even more problematic. And then there's a bunch of procedurally generated stuff on top of that, which produces cases that are bugged that you may never see as a developer. And it takes, 1 million people or 250,000 people or whatever else testing the damn thing for those to show up. So it took me a solid week to write out a test plan for my game. That's just writing it out. That's just figuring out what needs to be done. That's me solidly for 1 week trying to think through all the cases and then just writing down what I needed to make sure it didn't break. To actually test that would still take me 20 plus hours. And so from a bug perspective, it's been an absolute nightmare. All I've been able to do is try to head off the bugs I suspected might exist at the pass, and then be proven horribly wrong when people actually got the game into their hands and played it differently to me. So that's one side of things. Then when it comes to the balance of time and difficulty, what I try to do is chunk the game up into what I would consider like 4 major stages, hour 10, or up to hour 10, hour 20, hour 30, hour 40. Or in my case, just first, second, third, and fourth quarter of the game. And then made sure that there was some level of balancing and gating for players who were in those sections of the game. Because, anything more granular would just drive me completely insane. And then it was, playing the game, warping myself to areas as quickly as possible, faking the equipment I expected I'd have at that particular point, and then checking those enemies worked. And then, of course, being told I'm horribly wrong by players. So that works too. I'm more than happy to rebalance stuff based on players going, "This is ridiculous, dude." You know, I'm in hour 35 of the game, and this spell is way underpowered at this point. So, and it cost me all my devotional tears. So please do something about that. And that's okay. Yeah, my bad. No problem there. I'm not precious about it in that regard.
One of the things that attracted me to Moonring was its atmosphere, which, you know, we talked about at the beginning. What to you helps contribute to atmosphere? Because I imagine when you're doing early design, it's just kind of like, oh, I'll do an open world and I'll put like dungeons here and there. And that doesn't, like, that just feels too stiff and too mechanical. But then when you talk about atmosphere, it feels too, I guess, like, I don't know what word I'm looking for, not as tangible like a feeling as like another word could be. So like, how do you God, this is a terrible question. How do you evoke a good atmosphere in your game?
For me, it always comes down to music. So I've written weird ambient-ish music for a good decade or more now. Mostly based around odd textures and effects and trying to evoke moods and tones, rather than writing, you know, what people would recognize as tunes. And so for this, I lent very heavily into a specific subgenre of music called dungeon synth, which began in the early 90s from black metal bands. And I was just listening to a ton of that.
This is explaining so much.
It's all very mournful music. It's usually very nostalgic, and is meant to make the listener kind of yearn for a world that does not exist. You know, basically, wouldn't it be better to be living in a fantasy universe right now rather than filling shelves at Safeway or whatever your life happens to have in it? And so for me, it was the thing I decided I needed to learn to do with this game. And so I lent very heavily into dungeon synth itself. I started talking to other dungeon synth artists about their methods of production and stuff. And actually, there are two, one guy called Badawar and another called Cand, who have quite a lot of music in the game now. But I set myself the task to write tracker music, yes, because I'm completely nuts. So music based on music technology from 1989, and use that to create dungeon synth, which I've never made before. In fact, I've never really written tunes before. So having to lean into that and learn all about it was kind of, for me, the establishing foundation for the mood and the tone of the game.
Which I think is great, because I think I'm sick to death of hearing generic fantasy music. But generic fantasy music gets me, like, not hyped, but kind of like, oh yeah, I'm excited for the adventure. I don't want to say I'm going to a funeral, but I feel like I'm doomed when I'm in the overworld listening to the music.
Good. Good. That's exactly how you should feel. No, I genuinely like dungeon synth. I listen to it all the time. They're much like vaporwave. There's like a whole ton of subgenres of it, and it's a genuinely punk movement. Like these are, you know, individual guys sitting around various desolate cities of the world, or out in the wilds of Norway or wherever, making gloomy fantasy music. That isn't, I once saw Lord of the Rings, and so I'm going to write this for a while. No, these are guys going, no, we're all really depressed. We're going to make you depressed too, but in chainmail. So that, for me, is that, like, perfect as a feeling for the world of Moonring. I mean, it's night there all the time, and it rains most of the time too.
So Moonring's been a passion project for you. You said you were developing it for something like 4 years?
Yeah. 4.5, yeah.
Why make it free?
Well, it was never intended as a commercial project. And it wasn't meant to take 4.5 years. I honestly thought I'd knock it out in a year, and that would be it with my little free vanity project. But then I think I may have engaged in scope creep
Oh no.
a little bit for 3 years. Well, 3.5. And yeah. And the thing is, I had so much, I experienced so much generosity while I was making it initially. So I had an old friend from, many years ago, say, "Oh, I'll do a bunch of the art for you," and he actually sort of created the look of the characters in the game and the doll dress system for all of them, which I wasn't going to do initially. And he gave me a bunch of monsters and things, and redrew some of my crappy environmental tiles. And then I had dungeon synth artists very generously giving me their tracks, or writing tracks in many cases, for the game for free, and people testing the game for free. And so by the time I'd kind of got to the point where I thought I'd finished it, which also turns out to be completely untrue, I'd had so much goodwill from these people, I just couldn't charge. And like, you look at the world after COVID, and everybody miserable and depressed and poor, and I can't charge now. That would make me a massive arsehole. so yeah, so the game's free for better or worse. But it still aligns with my original intent, which was to make sure that more people played this kind of game, especially mine, because apparently I have a massive ego, and you got to play my game rather than going back and playing Ultima. So yeah, the free thing is great for engagement and getting your game out there. Obviously not so great for eating anything other than pot noodles, but I will survive somehow.
Did COVID influence the tone of the game at all?
So COVID was awful. COVID was terrible for everybody. But as somebody who is quite delighted sitting indoors and never engaging with humans, it didn't really affect me that much in that regard. What it did do is make me aware that there was, everybody from little mom and pop shops to students who were just trying to launch their lives, etc. There were so many people whose lives were utterly wrecked by it. And so while it didn't affect the mood and the tone of the game, it certainly affected the mood and tone I saw in my head when I was thinking about the potential audience. And like I said, every single game is an exercise in manipulation of psychology. And I think you have to take into account what the world is like while you're doing that.
Something I've always found interesting reading about plagues of the past is how like culture changed, and a lot of art seemed to take like a very drastic direction during COVID. I love Pup. They're one of my favorite bands, and they released an album called "This Place Sucks Ass." I'll probably never listen to that album again because it's too COVID-ish. But I was like, this is it. This is the peak COVID artistic movement for me, at
Yeah,
least.
I think all historical events lived through produce art of that sort, and you'll go back to that in 10 years' time and go, wow, yeah, that still evokes the same feelings, which is just a fascinating thing for me. It's more than a photograph. It's more than a recording of that. It's like a placing in amber of a section of your emotions, and I think that's wonderful. That's what art's for, really.
Was going stir crazy from COVID what inspired the Fog of Amber, or was there a different source of inspiration?
So the amber was actually partly inspired by James Herbert's The Fog, which is, it's not good, but it's still one of my favorite horror novels.
Oh, okay.
It's not good in the way that a lot of James Herbert's 80s and 70s horror is not actually. I certainly wouldn't expect to see it in a literature class. But again, the mood it evokes is wonderful, and so Amber was there, and Amber as a word and a concept is something I've wanted to use for decades at this point. I was originally going to try and use it in Fable 3 before things were pushed in a very different direction, as a thing that could set time and place permanently, and once it thawed would reveal those things from ages past. So that's what I was originally going to do with Amber in Moonring, and then the whole James Herbert thing kind of crept back into my mind. I thought, oh, actually, it's more interesting this way.
So,
So
You mentioned earlier you have basically lore as in a way to fill gaps or explanation for mechanics. But how do
Yeah.
you keep track of lore? Do you have like your own note system, and as well as how are certain things created? Like how do you make a language? Is it just random noises you put down, or
So the thing about creativity, and I think this is like the great secret of all artists and creatives all over the world, is we just make shit up. Shh, don't tell anyone. And the actual work of creativity is deciding when you're going to plonk your flag in the sand and go, no, no, this is all true. This is all fixed now. This is what I meant, etc. Because the actual art, the actual sort of art part of it is actually it's the easy bit. You are just doing whatever comes naturally. It's the justifying it afterwards thing, which is sort of the real work. The example I often give is that people who are fans of Twin Peaks will know who Agent Cooper is and the fact that the guy loves coffee. And I always say, well, he could just as easily have liked yerba mate or tea. And that's what you'd be talking about now. You'd be talking about that crazy Agent Cooper guy and the fact that he loves British tea in the morning. And that would have been the zeitgeist from 1989. And, that would have been pictures of him holding a teacup on the cover of Time magazine and all that kind of stuff. And it wouldn't have altered a damn thing. It's not like coffee was chosen specifically for some plot reason. It was an artifice added to make a character have a thing, and then David Lynch just went, "That's it. We're sticking with coffee." And so for me, a lot of creativity is very much like that. You do something, and it either feels right or it doesn't feel right, and then the work of making sure it kind of remains alive is the rest of your job. So when it came to making the language for Moonring, that wasn't difficult. That was basically trying to make sure it worked as a puzzle, and also sounded like it would produce reasonable words when strung together. And I know that sounds very, very inelegant and a little mechanical, but that's unfortunately the problem with making games. They are inelegant and mechanical when you sort of drill down into what it takes to make them. And the job of a creative is to try and forget that wherever possible and kind of rise above it again and go, right, where was I? I just had to do some engineering there. Right, phew, I'm out of that now. How can I focus on feel again?
speaking of feel in design, the map of your game Moonring. I almost forgot the name of the game. The map of Moonring. I don't want to say it's linear, but it definitely guides the player in certain areas versus something like Skyrim that's like just one giant endless open soup where you can go anywhere. How do you balance the feeling of I need the players to go certain directions at certain times for narrative purposes or for balance purposes, but also granting them a feeling of exploration so the map isn't just straight and linear?
Oh, that's really easy. What you do first of all is you make a completely different map, which is what I did, and then play that game and realize that it sucks ass. That is a really, really helpful metric. You basically go the Morrowind stroke Skyrim route to begin with, and then go, this is horrible. And I have no idea why I'm going. The original world was actually based on a pentacle. So there are 5 major towns, and they were all arranged in a pentacle. And if you were to draw the lines of the pentacle, it would describe the trade routes. Because I also have like a sort of an interest in occultism and stuff, and I like to plonk sigillistic stuff into games whenever I can.
Is that why the teleport lines kind of make a pentagram?
Yes, and so in pursuit of that, I made the world's worst fantasy map. And then, as I said, while playing it, I realized it sucked dog balls for money. And then decided, okay, what I actually want psychologically, again, coming back to that, and revised it all so it would provide a sense of, okay, these areas are clearly going to be less dangerous, and these areas are going to be more dangerous. There's something called a signed distance field you can create if you're into coding, which basically says that this is the important information line stroke object, and then how do you calculate every sort of cell of the world, how far away is that from the interesting thing? And that's kind of how I started to think. Imagine an amoeba growing into a place where there is or is not food. That was kind of the approach I took the second time around, to kind of treat the interesting places as the food for the amoeba, and the other areas as kind of how the arms would explore, and twist and coil and wander around looking for more food. It's a very peculiar explanation, I know, but I hope it makes some sense to somebody out there.
Oh, actually, I think it makes perfect sense. It feels like you have tendrils out to the main towns because that's like the safety area, and I'm like, oh, is there a way past those mountains? I wonder what's there or if there's anything designed there. And then when I get strong enough to finally breach and find the gap in the mountains to discover like this giant forest with fucking Sleethen hiding in there, I'm like, god damn, there's way more to this shit. And like that's a sense of like exploration that like I really appreciated.
Oh, I'm so glad. Thank you.
No problem. But you mentioned how Skyrim and Oblivion you just didn't find when you designed a map like that wasn't engaging. Do you think those types of open maps aren't engaging, or did you just think it wasn't engaging for Moonring in the game you were making?
So I'll be honest, I don't actually like most modern RPGs. I absolutely adored Dragon's Dogma. As cheesy as many of its aspects were, and as imperfect as many of its systems were, I thought it was absolutely fantastic, and I would play that a million times in a row rather than play through Skyrim once. I just don't like those worlds. I find them annoying and tedious and very, very talky. Everybody you talk to seems to know the entire history of the world, which is just baffling. And I play games to mostly get away from people. I use them as other people would use a country holiday. We get in the caravan and we're going to explore unknown places. And those games seem, most of the time to me, to be sort of undirected. Even though there's like a big arrow telling you where to go, they're undirected, as in, I never feel any one place is any more special than any other. And I just find that very, very unsatisfying. So yeah, they feel way more social than the games I like to play, and just sprawling, and I find that unsatisfactory. So yeah.
I want to pick your brain about Starfield, but not here. We got more questions to get through.
I've not played Starfield for obvious reasons. Not enough hours in the day.
So, given I heard the intro is like 8 hours, but a lot of stories can be boiled down to very simple, rudimentary, the hero's journey kind of stuff, which isn't a problem, just something to take notice of. Your game can kind of be boiled down in some ways to collect the MacGuffins. Again, not absolutely a problem, but how do you make collecting MacGuffins fun and engaging and each one feel different, even though it is essentially collect the MacGuffin?
So to a point, you don't. Because collecting MacGuffins is fun. I would say that I disengaged from the Zelda games when they stopped being collect the MacGuffins games. The thing about collect the MacGuffins games is they give you MacGuffins to collect, and that's very satisfying, especially when the MacGuffins do something, which, sadly they don't in Moonring. And then for me, like I said, about generating lore, once you start saying, well, why are these things here? Who put them here? Why are they in these locations? What would these locations be like? How do these reflect the values of the people who worship these places, etc.? I mean, you end up with a whole bunch of very interesting things to explore in terms of tone and like a ghost story. Like the pre-telling of the ghosty bit of the ghost story, the lead up to the ghost, is usually much more interesting than the ghost itself. And so, for me, there was a lot of fun stuff to explore in setting up these places before you got to them. Like I think if I'd said, go over there, collect the thing, and you could just walk over there and collect the thing, even if it was a big dungeon, it would have seemed rather more banal. But what I did instead was I put them all behind a wall of, okay, but you've got to do this other stuff first. But while you're doing that, you're still thinking, well, eventually, there's the anticipation. Eventually, I'll get to explore the jest or whatever it happens to be. And so my hope was that in learning more about the jest and seeing the locations that surround the jest and engaging with the puzzles about the jest or getting into the jest, that by the time you actually got into the jest, a lot of work will be done to give it more significance than it otherwise would have had.
That's fair. I feel like I honestly forgot why I was fighting Sleethen. It's just the journey to fight him was just so fun, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. And, I mean, and that's probably enough. I could have done a lot more in terms of the storytelling for those things, but I would rather leave the gaps. And I would say that from a storytelling point of view, in not engaging with cliches, the most recent Star Wars films were probably better written than the first Star Wars films.
I get the striking feeling you didn't like midichlorians as a concept.
I did not. I thought they were a terrible, terrible thing. They were a disservice to the entire franchise. But what I will say about the storytelling of the most recent Star Wars films is that despite the fact that they are probably better written, there is something really iconic about the simplicity and the trope-filled nature of the first movies. Those first three, despite being very, very much like westerns and samurai films and other things that had come before, stand the test of time because they are simple and clear, and the rest of the dressing that is sort of swaddled around them is what people actually engage with. Whereas I think the most recent Star Wars films are a lot subtler in their storytelling in some ways. The characters are much more complex and strange, etc. And then I think they're going to disappear into insignificance as the years pass. Nobody's even going to remember they were made. And I feel there's something to be learned from that. There's a reason why MacGuffins sort of work. And especially if you're trying to chunk a game up in your mind and you're busy and you have other things in your life, having some simple goals to follow makes up for the fact that there isn't an arrow constantly telling you why you're about to talk to this obscure person you heard of in some conversation previously.
I don't know. I don't think I'll ever forget in the newest Star Wars film where they just go, Palpatine's back. I don't know how, but he's back.
Oh, God. Yeah, that's fair. No, that's fair. I think you've just undermined my entire argument there. Damn it.
Sorry about that.
Can we re-record that section now?
Well, I think that was because, like, I don't know. I could go on for... I didn't even watch the latest one that came out.
No, nor did I. Nor did I. I ignored it. I'd had enough by then.
I had a friend describe the plot, and I was like, thank you. I'm not going to watch it now.
But it's a more grown-up plot. It's more complex. It's more nuanced, etc. But it's just also utterly unsatisfying.
Is it more nuanced? Because, like...
Well, when people say nuanced, they just usually mean more complicated.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess it's more I don't know. I feel the opposite because it's just like we built another Death Star, and then it's like we brought Palpatine back, and I'm like, what are we doing? Like, what is?
There's a lot of room for, you just don't understand in that, and I think that's what they relied on, or something. I don't know. I have no idea what they were thinking, but yeah.
Okay.
Let's just not speak of them again.
It's okay. They never happened. Getting back on track to Moonring. What lessons did you? Because you have, I'm not going to give the specifics amount of time, but you have a lot of time in the games industry. What lessons did you take away that helped you with Moonring? Because I imagine that it at least made it easier. Because they always tell you if you're starting out, don't make your first game an open world RPG, kind of thing. Yeah,
they do tell you that, and it turns out there's a very good reason for that. Don't just don't. It's a work of complete insanity. Every single system will break all the other systems, and if you enter into it thinking, well, when I made Spellraiser, it took me 9 months. That wasn't problematic. I'm not going to use any engineering principles at all. I'm just going to go kind of slap happy and write code as it comes to my head.
Oh no.
Which is how I wrote Moonring. Then you are not so much making a rod for your own back. I live amongst the redwoods. I feel like I have an entire forest on my back. So yes, don't do that. Other lessons I would say I have learned are mostly about the fact that the community out there is nowhere near as scary as I thought it was. One of the things I didn't want to do was engage with the Steam community at all. Like I originally thought, oh, I don't want the death threats, I don't want the hate mail, I don't want the I've played this for 400 hours, have a thumbs down review because I didn't enjoy my 400. I didn't want any of that stuff. And what I've actually had from the experience has been the most love, support, and genuine goodwill I've ever experienced in this industry. It's been an absolute revelation. I've been so utterly gobsmacked by the positivity and the niceness and helpfulness of people who in some cases have lost, a 15-hour save because of some ineptness on my part, and they've gone, no, don't worry about it, don't worry, I'll just start another game because I was enjoying it anyway. Like I've never experienced that in my entire life. I was expecting to be doxxed, I was expecting a whole bunch of the horror things that you hear from people nowadays. And so that's been a huge lesson for me. I've been very humbled by the community so far. Other than that, I've learned, be more regimented when you're writing your code, especially if it's going to be something you suspect may not actually be a 9-month project. And sometimes you have to engage in insanity because a game just wants to get out there. And that is ultimately how I feel about Moonring. Yes, it took 4.5 years. Yes, I'm going to make no money from it. But I'm glad it exists. I'm glad it's out there, and I'm glad people are resonating with it and understanding what I was trying to do with it. And that's been an absolute joy.
You could just always say that the dev cycle was clouded in a haze of amber, and that's what got the better of you.
I could, and it would not be entirely inaccurate.
Well, I think that is a wonderful note to leave off of. I'm sure your community will greatly appreciate it. You're very active in your Discord, I've noticed.
I try to be. I feel I owe people my time. It's like, I'm so sorry I made this game. There are so many bugs. I am going to get around to it. Oh God, you're testing this for free for me. I really appreciate that. And so, yeah, there's this enormous sense of the fact that I owe these people. These people are, throwing away hours of their time sometimes on balked save games. And yeah, I kind of owe them. I'm responsible for their misery if they're miserable. So, I can't help the fact that their cat died or they're just getting divorced or whatever else, but I can fix the damn game. And so that's my attitude.
So that way, when they're done with their misery there, they can play Moonring, which is not at all a miserable world to be in.
It's fine. It's like listening to goth music. It's that's what it's there for.
I after work, sometimes I'm just really depressed. I'm like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to smoke weed, and I'm just going to play Moonring. It'll be fine. That's that's what I've been doing for the past week. Doesn't always go great, though.
No, I imagine that the attention deficit that weed can cause probably doesn't help when you're in the middle of, like, the third floor of the Jest.
Yeah, I don't know where I am sometimes. I'm like, you know what? That's part of the journey. I think that's why I still like Skyrim's map sometime,
Yeah, fair.
Despite its vast flaws, there's a part of me that still loves that. But
I honestly wish I could too, but meh.
You just got to be in the right headspace. I couldn't stand it for like a long time. You just have to make your own fun. But that's a whole other. I swear to God, I could do a whole podcast just on Skyrim alone because like I've put 300 hours in the game at least, and I kind of hate it now. But if you got me for the first 100 or so hours, there's something right you did at some point in there. I can't dismiss the whole concept.
No, indeed. Absolutely. I don't think anybody's going to be playing Moonring for 100 hours.
They might just be
I can hope.
Really lost like I am, where I can't find where to get the fucking boat.
Oh, you are thinking too linearly. That's your problem there.
I'll keep that in mind. But where can people find you? What are you thinking about shouting out? Any kind of links you got? I had one guest shout out a local pizza place.
Oh, crikey. So that never occurred to me. I could be found working in a place called the Chocolate Dragon in Rockridge, Oakland, if people are ever there. So, yes, you'll see me sitting there with a ridiculous moustache and a very large hat. So feel free to say hi if you come by there. Other than that, I'm mostly hanging around on the Discord, and if you are posting on Steam. I will get around to reading all of your comments and things relatively soon. Again, I do sort of huge read sessions, but there are a lot, and I am still mostly trying to debug the game and make it a little more stable.
Well, I think that's been mostly it for the podcast. If you want to be able to watch this podcast, which in retrospect you already are, but you can find me on YouTube, Podbean, and Spotify as of now. You can find me on Twitter, Threads, and Bluesky under Paper Prototypes. I don't remember exactly what I called myself across all the platforms. There's too many. Try to find me. And, of course, my link tree will be in the description down below, so that way you can actually find me. And don't forget to maybe check out my Ko-Fi and support me so I can keep doing the podcast. As always, thank you for watching, and I like to thank my guests as well. So, bye!